Does psychoanalytic therapy ever actually end? This is the question Freud explores in the paper called Analysis Terminable and Interminable, written in 1937, where he examines whether psychoanalytic therapy can truly reach a clear ending, or whether the work of analysis continues indefinitely. For Freud, the unconscious can never be fully completely conscious. Even after important analytic work, old patterns can return, resistance can reappear, and the mind often repeats familiar forms of suffering instead of fully changing them. Freud pays particular attention to resistance, meaning the forces within the mind that oppose transformation. Parts of the mind cling to old habits, old symptoms, and familiar ways of functioning, even when they produce suffering. He also discusses what he calls negative therapeutic reactions, situations where improvement itself creates anxiety or resistance, making change more difficult. Freud therefore argues that some analyses become theoretically endless because there is always more unconscious material, more resistance, and more repetition to work through. This idea connects to another famous statement by Freud. Freud identified three impossible professions: education, government, and psychoanalysis. They are impossible because complete success can never be guaranteed. There is always something in human beings that escapes total control, prediction, or transformation. In education, the goal is to mold a child into a civilized, rational, and fully functional member of society. The impossible reality is civilization requires the suppression of basic human instincts. Education always battles against a child's innate drives, meaning it can never achieve perfect success without causing some degree of psychological conflict. In governing, the goal is to create a perfectly orderly, just, and compliant society. The impossible reality is governing attempts to regulate the collective behavior of individuals driven by chaotic, aggressive, and selfish impulses. No government or system of laws can ever fully align the desires of the individual within the needs of the state. In psychoanalysis, the goal is to fully cure psychological distress and bring the unconscious mind into perfect harmony with the conscious mind. The impossible reality is that the human mind is inherently conflicted. A psychoanalyst cannot fix a person permanently because defense mechanisms, resistance, and the volatility of the unconscious mean that psychological stability is an ongoing balancing act, not a final destination. In this paper, Freud also says that if an analytic work stops because of external circumstances, such as money, time, illness, or life difficulties, this should not necessarily be considered a failed analysis. Freud instead calls this an incomplete analysis. In this essay, Freud admits that psychological transformation is often only partial. Some aspects of the personality change, while other parts remain relatively unchanged by the analytic process. Freud even extends this idea to psychoanalysts themselves, since Freud believed that analysts should periodically return to analysis themselves. He even suggested that analysts undergo analysis every 5 years, and he justifies this recommendation through several key observations regarding the nature of analytic work, such as the risk of countertransference, effect of repressed material, as some patients can stir up the analyst's own suppressed instinctual demands, which they might otherwise keep under control in other situations, and also the misuse of power within the analytic relationship, leading to the risk of misusing that authority. And this is particularly dangerous if the analyst has not mastered the weak points in their own personality. This means that psychoanalysis is not simply a treatment for patients, but also an ongoing task for the analyst. At the end of the paper, Freud concludes that the goal of analysis is not to create a perfect human being or achieve complete inner harmony. Rather, the aim is to secure what he calls the best possible psychological conditions for the function of the ego. In other words, psychoanalysis does not promise perfection. It aims to help the individual live with greater awareness, greater freedom, and a better relationship to unconscious conflict.